President Biden and House Speaker McCarthy are expected to continue debt limit talks face-to-face at 5:30 p.m. this afternoon. With about 2 weeks left before the U.S. defaults on its debt, some are advocating for Biden to use the 14th Amendment. Our next guest says this may not be a viable option. Joining us now, we've got Brendan Pedersen, who is the Punchbowl News financial services reporter. Brendan, why is it not a viable option?
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm an administrative law nerd, kind of. I've covered banking, regulatory stuff for a little bit now, and I'd be fascinated to see how this plays out, as would a lot of progressives in Congress and beyond who are calling on President Biden to just invoke that 14th Amendment, that line that says the public debt of the United States shall not be questioned. That's cool, and I wish that we could use that to never talk about the debt limit again. But this is going to be a really risky court challenge, ultimately. We can talk all day about like who has the standing to drag this case up to the Supreme Court if Biden did invoke it. But ultimately, I'm just not bullish, and most folks are not bullish, that a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court would let this thing stand if Biden just said, oh, the debt limit's unconstitutional, we're not going to worry about it today. What you're doing in that case is betting financial market confidence and the broader global economy, more importantly, the U.S. economy for policymakers here, on this court challenge thing not breaking against you. I don't think that's a bet that the White House wants to make. At least Treasury Secretary Yellen, who has said this is probably not the best option, she does not want to take that bet.
It's so interesting to me, Brendan. There's a story making the rounds on Twitter a bunch today by your peers over at Semaphore saying Tim Kaine is expressing regret that the Dems didn't just get rid of the debt ceiling when they had the chance. Like, yeah, but I mean, you have to wonder, looking beyond this, is the next party that has more unequivocal power going to get rid of this thing so we don't have to keep, I mean, like you, I would like nothing more than to not be talking about this every time. Do you think that's a realistic outcome, though?
It's a great question. It does seem like, to a certain extent, that lawmakers forget about the debt ceiling or think that it will be useful to them at some point up until it becomes a more loudly ticking time bomb, right? The other thing to think about here is the political map for Democrats, who are the party most likely to get rid of the debt limit at this point, if you ask me. The Senate map for Democrats is not great looking. And we have very little idea what the 2024 presidential contest is really going to look like. So honestly, I think it's really hard to predict at this point. If Democrats have a really great election, right, coming off of the reversal of Roe v. Wade, there are other systemic forces that could ultimately buoy the party. But I don't know. It's hard to imagine lawmakers parting ways with their favorite recession turning off button, unless, of course, we default, right? Which I don't think is fully off the table at this point. If we did default, maybe lawmakers will feel a little bit differently about having this sort of Damocles hanging over them.
Okay, so not fully off the table. What do you believe, though, the probability of getting a deal then, though, done is?
You know what? I'm hesitant to even put a number on it at this point. Here's what I'll say. I mean, Democrats absolutely do not want to default.
What about just before the X date?
One more time, the X date?
What about just getting a deal done before the X date?
I think it's pretty possible I think it's extremely likely that lawmakers will act to use a short-term funding measure if we really get up to the line here. There's also a possibility that enough House Republicans balk at that and say, like, no, we want a deal right now, trying to maximize their political leverage. I mean, we could make a mistake here. That is something I think that a lot of people following this have been pretty honest about. It seems like we're in some pretty testy waters. But with all that said, I mean, no one wants to default. The issue is that House Republicans are a bit more skeptical about the immediate financial impact of a default, right? They think the Treasury Department has this secret plan that will allow them to prioritize payments. Prioritization is the big word that gets thrown around, to ultimately nullify a lot of like the immediate financial impact of, the Treasury markets suddenly not functioning anymore. But Yellen herself, Secretary Yellen, has said, look, in the event of a default, it is all but certain that some bills are going to get unpaid or go unpaid. That's Social Security benefits for our seniors. That's veterans benefits. There's all sorts of things where people rely on money from the federal government to make their lives function. And those payments, the payments that affect real Americans, are what's probably going to be felt the most immediately.
I mean, is there also a chance here that House Republicans do believe Janet Yellen, but they would be happy to see dire economic consequences, betting that the president and the Democrats would be blamed here?
That's a great question. And that's the sort of thing where you have to kind of look back to 2011 to get a sense of political consequences here. I mean, I don't think the House Republicans fared all that well after 2011 in the following elections. We definitely saw some impact of our economy was already kind of sluggish. That was a really drawn out fight. And so I think in this case, there's absolutely an argument to be made that Joe Biden is the president. It's his economy, and he is where the buck stops, in theory. But I think Republicans, in their messaging, have been very explicit about wanting the kinds of concessions that they are asking for from the Biden administration at this point. I think it's relatively clear that this is something that Republicans are pushing for. And so if you ask me, I would probably expect Republicans to take a brunt of the blame here if we hit the default. I don't know how many of them in Congress believe that, but I think that has to be on some level at the back of your mind. I mean, if you're a politician, survivability is, pretty high up there in terms of your priorities. So I would have to think.
Yes, I think that's a good point. Brendan Pedersen of Punchbowl, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you.